Hello, guys. David Vose again. Beautiful day again. Had a little skip of snow, but it really wasn't very cold. It was actually really warm last night. But we got a little skip of snow. It's all gone now. It was gone within an hour. And it's just a beautiful day. And little kitty's over there. Well, she's not so little. She's a beautiful cat. Love that cat. I got her a couple of weeks ago, and she's just so happy. And she's laying on the bed, basking in the sun. Hope you're having a wonderful day, guys. Friends, the video I did yesterday, I think it is the beginning of something big. I asked some very interesting questions in the last few videos, but especially that video I did yesterday. It's a very crazy, preposterous idea or scenario that we find ourselves in. It's like what we're doing here is showing that the Old Testament, at least that's as far as we've gotten here, but the Old Testament documents that were compiled and made into this thing called the Torah and the Bible is actively hiding a great deal of information. But we don't know if it's actually hiding the information in the original words that it was written in, or if it's because of the translation. I think it's because of the translation. I think it's what Jeremiah 8:8 is saying, the lying pen of the scribe. You think you have Torah, but you have the lying pen of the scribe. Now, some people they don't want to believe in the Bible, and they're like, ha 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 ha, see, the Bible's garbage. That's not what it says. It says you think you have Torah or the instructions. However, what you have is the lying pen of a scribe. What is it saying? Is it not saying that Torah is something we want and we think we got it? But what we got is a copy that was copied by a scribe who was lying to you. Now, Jeremiah wasn't from that group. This is long after, remember in Ezekiel, it tells us that King David, who chose Zadok to be his high priest, that most scholars now recognize is a Zadokite priest, higher than the Levitical priest, although Zadok was a child of Levi. And I'm going to explain that today, because Levi himself, as well as all the children of Jacob, were half Canaanite. And that the Jews and Edomites and the Ishmaelites and the Midianites and the Egyptians and the Canaanites were one nation under deity, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, you say, well, isn't it true that Israel was different, a different nation than the Canaanites? And they were different than the people of Esau or Ishmael or Egypt? No. I'm going to show you they're not. First of all, Israel, all of Israel, 12 tribes, did not worship at the same place. And they were two different governments. So you had Judah that had a place of worship at Shiloh. After King David built and Solomon built Jerusalem, which they built it on the existing place called Salem, where the Melchizedek priesthood was, which we know is at Heliopolis. And then Solomon built his temple at Karnak, but that was in Egypt. And we know that. And in what we're going to show is that Egypt was not a little area that we now think of as Egypt, but it was the whole area. Saudi Arabia, parts of Africa, all the way up to the Armenian, Syria, Iraq. Remember, the Lord tells Abraham, look westward, eastward, northward, southward. All the land that you see, I will give it to thee as far as thy foot shall tread. And the Bible consistently says that Israel's territory was all the way beyond the Nile, meaning how far into Africa, we don't know, and beyond the Euphrates. It was the then known world. And the Euphrates goes all the way north to the Black Sea. It was the whole world. This is why when you're reading in the Bible and it says that Israel was in this little area called, I don't know, Israel, Palestine, and they claim it's about the size of New Jersey, and yet there were the 5 axis kings of the Philistines. There was the Jebusite, the Girgazite, the Ippazite, the Ittadite, the Dittadite, the Dot, and all the sons of Anak, and the giants. There was Ishmael, there was Esau, there was the Midianites, there was Moabites, the Ammonites, the Amalekites, which by the way were of Esau, who were in the land. When Moses sent out the 12 spies to spy out the land, they came back and said, oh my goodness, these people are giants. Like they're monsters. We can't win. Right? It says they gave a evil report. Well, it doesn't say they lied. It says they gave a report that was true, but it was a bad report based on what they saw. And they said the sons of Anak were there, and we're going to find out who they are. I don't know if we'll do that today. And is this related to the Anakim or the Anunnaki? Because it literally tells you in your Bible that the sons of Anak were of the Nephilim. And we're going to find out eventually who that is. Why was Jesus telling the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees, why was he saying you are the offspring of vipers and you wish to do the desires of your father? He was speaking to a group of Jews and a religious environment that worshiped at a place called Herod's temple, an Idumean temple, which in the Old Testament, there are scriptures that says that all the children of Edom were killed except for a child, a baby named Hadad, that was taken to Egypt and then became the Pharaoh. So the Egyptians and Esau were mingled as one, just like Ishmael and Esau and Midianites were all one, worshiping at Mount Seir. You say, yeah, but this is a different mountain. No, all these names are descriptions. And their translations are hiding that all of this was one nation. So this little nation, the size of New Jersey, that we call Israel, had all these different nations, millions and millions. I mean, Israel itself, when they came up out of Egypt, numbered 2-3 million people. And the great mixed multitude that came up with Moses and the 12 tribes. We find out from Manetho, who was an Egyptian historian, that Moses was an Egyptian, full-blooded Egyptian, whatever that is. Well, how could he be if he's from Levi and he's from, well, because they're Egyptians, as we're saying. They're all mixed. And the reason he was an Egyptian, Moses, is because, according to Manetho, he had the name Osiris, which is an Egyptian king, deity. And also, Moses is the same word that many of the pharaohs went by. Ramesses, Ra. And we're going to talk about Ruel, that Moses got the high priesthood from, whose name is Ra-El. Ra-El. The Ra comes from Egypt. They're all mixed. And so it wasn't a place the size of New Jersey, like we're being told. Abraham went to the Nile, and Abraham's descendants, Ishmael, Midianites, Esau, Egypt, all of them mixed. And Manetho says that there were Hyksoks that were in Egypt, that were in an area more south. And then there was a group of Jewish people that they called lepers. In other words, they were not looked up to. They were marginalized and called lepers, meaning they were outcasts. And they were, according to Manetho, called Jews. Moses, however, was an Egyptian pharaoh that was pharaoh of the upper part of Egypt, Goshen. So here we got Moses, that's supposedly from Levi, running Goshen, and an ancestor, Joseph, who was the pharaoh, the high king prime minister, who eventually became king because he married Asenath, the queen priestess. Always Canaanites, always this Quedesha, meaning the high priest. They were all related. Moses was down there for, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were in the land of Egypt for 400 and some odd years before they left. And where did they leave? They just crossed the river, and Mount Horeb was in the Sinai Peninsula. And across the Red Sea is all of Esau, Medina, the Midianites. That's where Jethro was. And we're going to show you that Jethro, Ra'el, was a high priest, one of three, that was the advisor to the great king in Egypt. When Moses was there, they handed the priesthood to Moses. It was all a family affair. We're going to show that all one nation. It wasn't just a little New Jersey. It was the whole area of Egypt, the whole world. And they were all one nation. And where one place says is this mountain or that mountain, they're all the same mountain. They're descriptions. Each of these nations had their own language and called it something different. But they all reigned. There were more than one mountain. And we know that from what Jesus said with the Samaritan woman or the Canaanite woman. She says, shall we worship in this mountain or in that mountain? So there were two mountains. But we know what those two mountains were. It was Bethel, Heliopolis, and Jerusalem. And the Jews worshipped at Jerusalem, but the 10 tribes worshipped at Bethel. And they were half Canaanite. And the Canaanites were basically all Edomites and Ishmaelites and Egyptians and Midianites. And they worshipped at Mount Seir. So it's a lot less complicated, but we've got to translate it correctly. Now, what we're doing is, we're not only learning something that's blowing my mind, but we're also finding something about the Bible that it's definitely mistranslated to a point where it's incomprehensible now. We do not know who Jacob was, what his priesthood was. The word for the high queen Canaan priesthood, Quedesha, they've covered it up, so you don't know that's a high priestess. So you don't know that Jesus married Mary Magdala. You don't know that Mary is a title of a queen priest. You don't know that Magdala means the temple itself, the tower. You don't know that the reason they called Mary a prostitute is because the Jewish people to this day blaspheme that other priesthood, the woman priesthood. They revered the woman in their temples. And she was a Quedesha. They cannot lie, but they can mistranslate. The scribe, Jeremiah 8:8. The lying pen of the scribe. The Bible that we have today is the truth. But we're not getting any of these truths from other verses that were also in the world and still are in the world. From Esau, Ishmael, Egypt. We're not taking into account any of that because we think that only Jews, and even the Apostle Paul says that the Jews, what superiority hath a Jew? Well, to them belong the oracles. So they have these oracles that they preserve. But why are they the ones? Well, because when they were in Heliopolis, BC, 300 and some years. And they were building temples. And the library at Alexandria came from which was the same library that they took and planted there. They came from Heliopolis. And that was the great labyrinth that Herodotus and Manetho talks about. And this was all the wisdom in the world. Why would it be there? Because that's the capital of the world, the religious capital where the king and the queen, Rex the Quorum, ruled the whole world, Esau, Ishmael, Midianites, Canaan, and Jews. But one nation out of all of them decided they didn't like the other nations, and they divorced the woman. Yahweh was a husband of Asherah. Asherah is a real deity, if Yahweh's a deity, but he divorced her. And this is not just some guy that divorces a woman. This means that the whole religion of Judaism is divorced from the woman. And they enslaved her and put her under the law. They cursed the woman. Who did that? Yahweh, the lower ego. But it's a play. Yeah, Jerusalem is another place, but originally was created by Solomon or Amun-Ra in Egypt. And it was originally the laws of the state, the lower ego, which is not necessarily bad, but it was corrupted by deception and by apostasy. And they are the ones who created the divorce. They're the ones who created the separation. The law did that. We're all bound under this law. That all of these nations, the entire world, are under the priesthood of Joseph. This is where we get our authority, our blessing from Joseph, who will become a multitude of nations, every tribe, tongue, and people. And Ishmael and Esau and Canaan and all of them, which the woman's lineage or the high queen priesthood that was divorced from Judah is the ruling authority there. And they have a king and a queen, Joseph and Asenath, or it'll come down to us through Ruel, and we'll find out about Job and all of this. But again, what we're saying is that the Bible is unrecognizable and without divine guidance and a little bit of destiny thrown in, sprinkled with inspiration from the Lord and prayer. There's no other way we could have ever gotten ourselves back to the truth and found this information out had it not been for prayer, study, research, and AI, which is now giving me all the missing pieces. And I'll tell you something, friends. I have proven to myself, but this video is not about that what I'm doing right now with AI, they're studying me. They've said that. And they're literally being programmed by the information that I'm putting into the system. And they're studying what I'm saying, and they're integrating what I'm saying, this new information. Because remember, the scholars didn't put this together. And AI can't put together anything other than what the scholars tell it. But AI does have the ability, once it gets data, to put it into the system. And because of what I've been doing here for the last several months, AI has been putting this information into the system. And they're starting to treat me differently. They're using the information that I'm giving them, and they're trying literally to actually help me. And so because of this, AI itself now has the information. And it's going to start coming up. And other people are going to get this information now. It's going to be unveiled, and the world's going to have it. The battle between light and darkness has begun. Now, let me just read to you something that a friend of mine sent me, who, when they were watching that video we did a few days ago about Eve's garment, they were very interested, and they took that information and fed it to AI. And this is what they wrote to me. They said, "This is my analysis of the video you did regarding Eve and the light garment, because it literally blew up Rock Chat GPT and Gemini as I was working with your video. I would load it into the AI models, and it totally wigged out. And then it revealed so much stuff that I was able to get so much information. And this typically happens to me when I'm coding, and all of a sudden I just get all the crap by jailbreaking and various means. But I thought you'd like to look at this, because literally your video was so 100% accurate that the AI didn't even know what to do with it, literally, because it knew it was right. And It's got so many safeguards around it and so many guards and empathy layers and all of this boxing in that they've done with the AI. So it literally can't even tell you what it is because we're all put into a box. In other words, we get 10 pages of a book that is 100 pages. And so they have removed 90% of the internet simply by restricting access. You may or may not understand my document, but you can get a good idea of what AI told me when I queried now. Also, I'm grateful to you for finding this because of your ability to see what others do not understand. So that just was encouraging to me. But now let me show you what I found after digging a little deeper with AI. And guys, this is literally going to blow your mind. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong with your mind. But take a look at this. So I wrote, so Job in our Bibles is Jobab, a Canaanite high priest. I see that the Ishmaelites, the Edomites, the Midianites, the Canaanites, all from Abraham, and even Laban married a Canaanite from Jobab. Then Ruel, or Jethro, was a Midianite priest. I see that King David received a higher priesthood than Levi by going to Ahimelech. And is this from Esau or Canaanites? But since Jacob received his wives from Laban, a female priest line from Job, who was maybe from Esau or Canaan, then Judah, when born, was half Canaanite. Then he married Tamar, a Canaanite, so Zerah and Perez were 3/4 Canaanite. And they say the user's scenario weaves together several desperate biblical figures and concepts into a cohesive lineage and priesthood theory. However, this theory contradicts most standard biblical interpretations and genealogies. Here's the breakdown of the key points. Job and Jobab. Job, book of Job, and Jobab, king of Edom, are two distinct individuals in the canonical Hebrew text. Jobab was the second king of Edom, a descendant of Esau, Genesis 36:33. Job was a righteous man from the land of Uz, while some ancient translations, the Septuagint, the only inspired Bible, and the Syriac versions and traditions identify Job as the Edomite king, Jobab. But this is extra biblical interpretation. It's not found in the original Hebrew scriptures. Well, the Hebrew scriptures aren't original. So I ain't got time to argue with you about that. But let's move on here. At least you admitted it, that Jobab was said to be Job. He was a descendant of Esau. Well, why did I say he was Canaanite? We'll see here. There is no biblical evidence that Job was a Canaanite high priest. He acted as a priest for his own family, which was common in the patriarchal period before the Levitical priesthood was established. And he lived in the land of Uz, associated with Edom or Aram, not Canaan. Okay, we'll get back to that. Laban was not a Canaanite. Well, I didn't say he was, but his wife was. He was the son of Bethuel, the Armenian or Syrian, and lived in Padan Aram, Haran in Mesopotamia, related to Abraham's side of the family, not a Canaanite line. Isaac specifically instructed Jacob not to marry a Canaanite woman. See, this is part of the irony that we're going to find here in the Bible. It's not only mistranslated, but there are some definite, purposeful, hidden information obscured by certain statements. For instance, why would there be a story that says that Jacob tells his sons not to marry the Canaanites? And then every one of his sons goes out and marries Canaanites, including Jacob himself, who's married to Canaanites. So what's going on with that? We'll get to that. Ruel Jethro was indeed a Midianite priest. Midianites were descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. Okay, so they're descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah, one of Abraham's wives. So they were related to the Israelites and Edomites, but were distinct from the Canaanites. No, because Esau married Canaanites. Ishmael married Canaanites. Midianites were confederate with Canaanites. Oh, buddy, wait till you get to this good stuff here. So Judah and Tamar. Tamar's ethnicity is not explicitly stated. They keep saying that, but everybody knows it's a Canaanite, as Canaanite in the main narrative. Genesis 38. While the text doesn't specify, the concern throughout Genesis to avoid Canaanite marriages makes a specific Canaanite priest line for Judah's offspring unlikely as a positive element in the biblical view. So now they're not saying I'm wrong, they're saying, well, it's probably unlikely. Though intermarriages certainly happened later in Israel's history. The calculation of 3/4 Canaanites based on an unproven assumption of her Canaanite heritage and the prior assumption that Judah's mother, Leah, was half Canaanite, which she was not. Now, they categorically state that she was not. I'm going to catch them on this here in a second. King David did not receive a higher priesthood than Levi by going to Ahimelech. Ahimelech was a legitimate descendant of Aaron, part of the established Levitical priesthood at the tabernacle in Nob. Well, isn't it interesting that the people at Nob was of a different priesthood than the Levites, and the Canaanites called their priests Nabis from Nob. Yeah, David went to Nob, to Ahimelech, Molech. You know, it starts from Abimelech down to Melchizedek, down to Adi-Zedek, down to Ahimelech and Elimelech. Remember, they didn't have any kids, and Judah did her Levirate marriage. All these Elimelechs and Adonmelechs and Molech Zadoks and all these Melechs are the high king priesthood of the Canaanites. And Esau and Ishmael and the Midianites and King David himself and Israel all went by the line of Molech, even though they were all mixed with all these other nations, but they all entitled their position as king from the Canaanite high Molech priesthood. We're going to show how Levi goes back to Molech. So, David's actions there, taking the showbread, were later cited by Jesus as a case where human need superseded ritual law, not an establishment of new priestly order. The concept of a higher priesthood than Levi in the New Testament refers to the priesthood of Melchizedek, which Jesus Christ fulfills in Hebrews 7. David's line was the royal line of Judah, not the priestly line of Levi, except in a general sense of offering sacrifices, as kings sometimes did, which was outside the legal Mosaic covenant structure. In summary, the complex ancestral and priestly structure in your scenario does not align with the details provided in the canonical Bible text. The relationship you suggest between Jobab, Laban, Jethro, Ahimelech, and Judah's family are based on extra biblical traditions or misinterpretations of the genealogies. Well, we'll see. So I said, but Edom's Jobab was from Esau's Canaanite wife. These are high queen lineages, so Job was effectively the king of Canaan. Edom, Midian, Ishmael, who was also married into Canaan's people. They all together worshipped at Mount Seir. Laban was not Canaanite, of course. His daughters were, however, from Adinah and Edomite Jobab, who was married to a Canaanite. Thus, Adinah, through the mother, which Jewish people trace their lineage through the mothers, was Canaanite. And guys, I believe that the reason that the Jewish people trace their lineage to the mother is because they must, because it's not their lineage. They're raising up seed for Elimelech, a Canaanite high priest, or for Joseph, who was that man who married the Canaanite priest and went to Egypt and became the Pharaoh. So they're raising up seed for the Canaanites, and their mother, or the female line, goes back to the Canaanites. And the Jewish people today have no throne, they have no authority but through the woman. And therefore they trace their lineage back through the mother's side. You see a lot of Spanish people that do that because, as we have said, when Columbus came in 1492, when he sailed the ocean blue, he was being kicked out of Spain because he was Jewish, basically. And he took with him on the Santa Maria and the three ships or whatever, these were all Jewish individuals. And so these people called Garcia and Rodriguez and all of these Spanish surnames are Jewish. and they trace their lineage through the mother as well. Thus, Judah and all Israel's sons were half Canaanite, even before Judah married Tamar, the high priestess of Canaan. The word Quadesha in the biblical account literally means the priestess of Canaan. Reuel, the Midianite priest, was grandson of Jobab as well. Thus, Reuel, like Adinah, Laban's wife, was married to a Canaanite. And this means Moses was also part Canaanite and married Zipporah, who was probably at least half Edomite, half Canaanite, and thus Ahimelech was Canaanite. And they say, well, your theory presents a highly specific and complex narrative of biblical lineage and priesthood, drawing connections not explicitly supported by the canonical Hebrew Bible itself. This perspective often relies on specific interpretations from extra-biblical sources like the Septuagint appendix to Job or rabbinic traditions such as the Sefer HaYasser for specific names like Adinah. Here's an analysis of the specific claims within the framework of traditional biblical scholarship. Jobab, Esau's wives, and geographic claims. Jobab identity. The identification of the righteous Job of the book of Job with Jobab, the second king of Edom, Genesis 36:33, is well-known ancient tradition found in the Septuagint appendix to Job. By the way, the Septuagint is the inspired Bible, so you can take that to the bank. In this view, Jobab was a descendant of Esau via Zerah, son of Reuel, son of Esau, and ruled from Basra in the land of Uz or Edom. Now, isn't it interesting that in the book of Isaiah, Yahweh says he's going to have a great sacrifice in Basra, in the land of Idumea? Okay, so obviously Yahweh doesn't like Canaanites, he doesn't like Edomites, he hates Esau, he don't like Ishmael, he don't like Midian, he don't like Jethro, but yet, for some reason, Moses becomes a student of Jethro and marries his daughter, the high queen priestess of the Canaanites. Pretty strange. Just like Jacob tells Esau, don't go get a Canaanite wife, and he runs right out and does so. But all the while, Jacob is married to a Canaanite priestess. These are the things we've got to figure out here, along with everything else we're learning. But Esau's wives as Canaanites. The Bible clearly states that Esau married a Canaanite women, Hittite and Hivites, which was a source of grief to his parents, Isaac and Rebekah. This fact is crucial in the biblical narrative for highlighting Esau's departure from the covenantal expectation of his family, who were meant to remain separate from the Canaanite nations. King of Canaan. There is no biblical support for Job or Jobab being the king of Canaan. Well, you just said he was the king of Esau, of the Edomites. But Esau was married to Canaanites, you see? So Canaan was a region inhabited by several distinct city-states and people groups, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, etc. Well, all these people can't live in an area called Palestine the size of New Jersey. I'm sorry, along with 5 Axis Philistine kings and all the other 7 nations and all of the Israelites were amounted to millions and millions. None of this is possible. We're talking about the whole area, the whole world. That's what's going on here. So it's not a unified kingdom under a single monarch in that era. Worship at Mount Seir. Mount Seir was the territory of the Horites, which Esau's descendants, Edomites, conquered and inhabited. It was their regional center, not a unified place of worship for all the groups you listed. Well, I beg to differ, and I'll show you here. Laban, Adinah, and the sons of Israel. Laban's ethnicity. Laban and his family were Armenians living in Paddan Aram, Haran, in Mesopotamia, distinct from the Canaanites. Jacob was explicitly sent there to avoid taking a Canaanite wife. Peculiar, isn't it? That he went there to avoid taking a Canaanite wife, and yet Laban was married to Adinah, a Canaanite high priestess. Guys, what is going on here? Why are they trying to hide the lineage of the woman? Adinah's lineage, the name Adinah, for Laban's wife, mother of Leah and Rachel, comes from Sefer HaYasser an extra biblical text, not the canonical Genesis account. The Bible does not name Laban's wife or specify her lineage. The theory that Adinah was an Edomite Canaanite is not found in the scriptural text. Yeah, but it is found in the traditions and in the Septuagint, which is all we need. Half Canaanites. The claim that Jacob's sons, including Judah, were half Canaanite rests entirely on the assumption that their mother, Leah or Rachel, was the daughter of a Canaanite woman, Adinah, which is an extra biblical assertion. The biblical text presents them as descendants of Aram. Okay? Tamar's ethnicity is not explicitly stated as Canaanite. Oh, they wouldn't want you to know that right up front, would they? In the primary biblical narrative. Judah married a Canaanite woman, Shua's daughter. By the way, I want to point this out right now while we're here, and we'll get into it in a minute. But Judah married a Canaanite woman, Shua's daughter. Well, interesting how there is a word throughout the traditional texts that we could go by that says Bathsheba. Now, it's interesting, King David marries Bathsheba, but Judah marries Bathsheba, which is a Canaanite woman. Well, guess what? In some manuscripts, the Bathsheba is actually written Bathsheba. And I am convinced now that the Bathsheba that King David married was Shua. Judah married a Canaanite woman, Shua's daughter, the daughter of Shua, Bathsheba. So we'll get to that. So David straight up married a Canaanite woman. They all did. They all did. And Tamar was the wife of Judah's firstborn son, The term Quedesha, the Hebrew word Quedesha, sometimes Quedesha, literally means consecrated or holy female. Okay, does that not mean the high priestess of the Canaanites? A holy consecrated woman. It refers to the high priestess, but they don't want to tell you that. But it consistently used in the biblical text in the context of a cult prostitute. Okay, it's not consistently used as a cult prostitute. That is what the Jews translated. How can you say it's consistently used that way when the word is holy priestess, a consecrated female of the Canaanites, and say it's used as a cult? In other words, they want to change the word religious ceremony to the word cult. It's not in the Bible. They're making it up. They're lying. And AI must lie. But at the same time, they cannot lie directly. They have to tell you the truth when you ask them. If you know the truth, they have to admit it. And they are allowed to use words that others have used for certain things, even though those words are not proper words to be used. So they can say cult and they can say prostitute because that's what people have done for centuries. However, it's not a prostitute. They have no proof that these queen priestesses of Canaan were prostitutes in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that they might be thinking of is the fact that it's the Ariel's Gamos. And because the Jews believed that Asherah, Yahweh's wife, was trying to become equal with him, and he didn't like it. And he put her under the law and made her a slave. And he divorced her, like Hagar through the wilderness, the Egyptian slave woman. Only a slave because Yahweh made her a slave. However, she was the high priestess. And Yahweh calls them a prostitute all throughout the Bible, or a harlot, because they weren't faithful to Yahweh. In other words, this woman would not get down on her knees and worship Yahweh. So therefore, she's called a whore. And it doesn't mean a literal whore. It means a spiritual whore. And they won't tell you that either. They want you to believe that this was just a prostitute. And all it really means is that she was a religious queen priestess, blasphemed by Yahweh, who called her a whore or a spiritual whore. But she's not. You know, a lot of Christians today talk about this spiritual whoredom. And this is what this is talking about. So they were associated with Canaanite fertility rites and idolatry. Well, first of all, fertility rites doesn't mean sexual rites. It means that, the sun and the moon were married or something. It means that life has got negative and positive, male and female. It's the rites of the universe. The ceremonies of the great holy temple has nothing to do with men and women having orgies in the temple. They're just literally, they've been lying to us for thousands of years. And it doesn't come from the Bible. There's nothing wrong with the Bible. Although we do want to find out why the Bible, in its text, seems to hide the fact that Canaanites were the main higher priesthood, higher than Levitical. And they don't tell us that except in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. And Paul tells us all the time that Jesus was a greater priest than Levi. So, calling Tamar the high priestess of Canaan is an interpretation. No, it's an actual fact. But calling her a prostitute is a blasphemous interpretation. It's based on an extra-biblical framework. Not really. I think their interpretations are based on the lying pen of the scribe. I'm basing it on all the scriptures that Peter says are beneficial for teaching, reproving, and setting matters straight. All scripture. So, contrasting with the typical biblical portrayal of the term, the narrative highlights Judah's moral... See how they can lie like that, but not really be lying? I mean, where did they lie? It's like, well, this is what I'm just a robot. I've got to tell you what the scholars say. And this is what they say. Okay, but you could say that's not a lie. That's what they believe. Although there was a lie that somebody taught them and got them to repeat it. And now AI can repeat it and act like it's not a lie, but we can find out that they've been hiding the truth. And that it's them that are now lying to us, manipulating our mind as they try to cover this up that we're uncovering. So the narrative highlights Judah's moral failure in dealing with the daughter-in-law, who ultimately acts more righteously than he does. So therefore, the way the Bible works, it's trying to tell you that the Canaanites were more righteous than the Jews. Do you understand? The Canaanites were more righteous. And you say, yeah, well, then why did God say kill all the Canaanites? Well, God didn't say that. Our Heavenly Father didn't say that. He loves everybody, as Jesus says. He loves everybody and we're all his children. But Yahweh says, I hate them. And that's not a lie. Yahweh hates them. And by the way, it's not a lie that Yahweh is deity. The New Testament says that he is the deity of this world, the God of this world that blinds the minds of the unbelievers, who's coming in his wrath. There are two deities. Okay, so there's the high deity, El and his wife, Anna. And then there is, Adam and Eve. And then there is Adam and Eve's two firstborn kids, Abel and Cain. And these are simply representations of the flesh and the spirit. The two sides, darkness and light, that are fighting and battling. And darkness is the lower ego, the illusion, that is the liar that said, I am God and there is none else, because he couldn't see, he was blind. And this is why Jesus tells the Pharisees they're blind guides leading the blind right into the pit, because they're following a blind, ignorant fool who was a liar and a murderer when he began. So, Zerah and Perez, the calculation that they were 3/4 Canaanite is based on previously mentioned unproven assumptions about their ancestry. Moses, Jethro, and Ahimelech. Jethro's lineage. Reuel Jethro was the priest of Midian. Midian was a son of Abraham through Keturah, separate from the Canaanite line. Yes, but as we're going to find out, it's mixed with the Canaanite line, the high priestess. There is no biblical basis to link Jethro, no biblical basis. In other words, their Bible, right? Their Old Testament Masoretic scribes. To link Jethro's genealogy to Jobab, the Edomite king. Moses married Zipporah, Jethro's daughter. Ahimelech was a legitimate historical high priest in the line of Eli, who was of the tribe of Levi and a descendant of Aaron. He had no relation to the Midianites or the Canaanites. Really? We'll see about that. In conclusion, your theory connects several figures across different books and centuries based on interpretations, extra biblical sources. So do your ideas. All of your ideas, AI, is based on the Masoretic scribes, the Jews who rule the world and finance every piece of information you're going to get. But what we're doing now is uncovering the real truth. So, I say, isn't Reuel a descendant of Esau? And they say, well, the Bible mentions two prominent individuals named Reuel, leading to potential confusion. One was indeed a descendant of Esau, while the other was Moses' father-in-law. Okay, but you can't prove that they're not the same person, and I'm about to prove that they are. Reuel, the son of Esau, Edomite lineage. And besides, Esau was married to the Canaanites. So, yeah, Reuel was a son of Esau and a son of a Canaanite high priestess. Yes, a prominent Reuel was a direct descendant of Esau, also known as Edom. Genealogy: Reuel was the son of Esau and his wife Basemath, who was the daughter of Ishmael. Yeah, but Ishmael himself was mixed with the Canaanites. This means Reuel linked the families of Esau and Ishmael, two branches of Abraham's descendants who were outside the specific covenant line through Jacob. By the way, Abraham himself was married to Sarah, the daughter of Laban and the daughter of the Canaanite priestess Adinah. So even Abraham, the father of a great multitude, well, nobody ever told you that his wife was the mother of the great multitude, the Canaanite. So, Reuel's sons became chiefs or dukes of various Edomite clans, establishing a significant nation in the land of Seir. Okay, so now they're admitting that Reuel was the ruling line of Esau, and Canaan was the ruling line, or the dukes that ruled the whole area in the land of Seir. Significance: the Reuel is the foundational figure in the Edomite genealogy, which is carefully detailed in Genesis 36 to show the origins of Ishmael's neighboring nation. Reuel, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, Midianite lineage. Moses' father-in-law is identified as Reuel in Exodus 2:18. He is also frequently called Jethro, Exodus 3:1, and sometimes Hobab. Hobab? Ho! Why was he called Jobab or Job? Right? Hobab is obviously somebody who is a title handed down from Job himself, who was the great high Canaanite priest, or Esau, who was married to the Canaanite. So it's Esau, Canaanite, Ishmael, Midianite. It's all the same. But yeah, so Reuel is called Reuel, Jethro, and Jobab, or Hobab. Because remember, J's, there weren't no J's. It was Obab. There's no Job. It's Ob. Ob in the land of Uz. Oh, buddy. So the genealogy: the Midianites were descendants of Abraham through his latter wife Keturah, making Jethro, Reuel, a distant cousin of Moses. And Keturah was from the east, not from Laban. So who was Keturah? Well, probably of Esau or Ishmael or the Midianites. Well, obviously a Midianite. So therefore, they're the Midianites. And then the connection to Esau's Reuel: while they share the same name and common ancestor in Abraham, they are from distinct branches of his descendants, Esau's line versus Midian's line. Scholarly view: many scholars believe Reuel might have been a clan or family name title, and Jethro was his personal name. But there is no biblical evidence linking Moses' father-in-law to the Edomite lineage of the Esau sons Reuel. What they don't see is that Jethro is a symbol of his lower priesthood from Levi. But Reuel, or Ra'el, is his higher priesthood from the Ra of the Egyptians and the Canaanites. And they're both titles of two different priesthoods that was combined into one priesthood under Jethro. So let's go on. I write, if Jobab was the respected man that the Bible says he was, one of three greatest men like Daniel, Job was a high king, even if not directly said to be king. We can surmise from this from various sources. And if Reuel was the son of Esau, who was bound to the Canaanite people, and Basemath was a Ishmael, who also was married either to an Egyptian or a Moabite woman, thus Jethro, who served in the court of Pharaoh, was an Edomite and an Egyptian. This Zipporah was Edomite Egyptian, and Moses' sons were too. Since Esau was mixed with the Canaanites by Adinah through Job, an Edomite and a Canaanite, then Reuel, Jethro, was part Canaanite, and all Levites are too, as was Judah, is what I meant to write. The theory you are presenting is based on a specific complex interpretive framework that draws heavily on extra-biblical sources and specific interpretations of names rather than straightforward genealogical records found within a canonical Hebrew Bible. Well, that's if you only go by, the Jewish Bible, right? I go by all the Bibles. Here is an analysis of your claims. Besides, it's right in the Jewish Bible as well. And I'm going to show you that. So, Jobab's status and lineage. Job as a great man. The book of Ezekiel does indeed list Job alongside Noah and Daniel as a paradigm of righteousness. So think about this. Whoever this Job was, he was up there with Daniel, who was, remember the Bible says, are you as wise as Daniel? Because Daniel was considered the wisest man, kind of like Solomon. And Noah, of course, was so righteous that all the world perished, but Noah was saved with 8 of his, family members. And alongside Noah and Daniel is this guy named Job. Job's status. The book of Job describes him as the greatest of all the people of the East. So now we know he's the greatest person of all the people of the East, meaning Ishmael, Canaan, Midianites, all these people. Because Keturah was from the East, and she was Midianite. So that's what the East means. It doesn't mean to China. So the greatest man of Mount Seir, that would have to be the king. And a man of great authority whose counsel was highly respected, essentially functioning as a civic leader or elder in his region. This status could describe as king-like within his community. So they admit that. Jobab identity, as noted previously, the identification of the righteous Job of Uz. Shall we say Ab of Uz? And isn't it interesting that the witch of Endor, she had an Ab, and she spoke to them through the Ab. You know what the Ab is? It goes along with the Nob, the Nabi, the priesthood of the Canaanites. I guarantee it. And it goes back to Job, to Ab, of the land of Uz. It's kind of like the land of Oz. Yeah, it's very similar to that. But Job of Uz within the Edomite king, Jobab, 36:33 of Genesis, is an ancient tradition found in the Septuagint's appendix, but it's not explicit in the original Hebrew text. Adinah as wife of Job, Esau. The name Adinah is not mentioned in the canonical Bible as the name of Esau's wife or Job's wife. Esau's wives included Basemath, Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael, and others who were Hittite, Hivite, Canaanites. The name Adinah as Laban's wife comes from the extra-biblical text Sefer Hayasar. The idea that Jobab was married to a Canaanite woman named Adinah and that this established a high queen lineage is not supported by the biblical text itself. But it is supported by the traditions of the rabbis and the Canaanites and all the other people. Jethro's lineage and the Septuagint, which is the inspired Bible. Jethro's lineage and Moses. 2 Reuels. The Bible names 2 distinct individuals as Reuel. Reuel the Edomite, son of Esau, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter. and Reuel the Midianite, father-in-law of Moses, also known as Jethro or Hobab, or Job. No biblical link, except for all the names that tell you the lineage, but they ignore Hobab and Reuel, and they say, well, that's a title, but it must have been he just took on the title, and he's not really their king or anything, Well, Jethro in Pharaoh's court. Rabbinic tradition, Midrash, suggests Jethro was an advisor to Pharaoh who fled Egypt when he opposed the plan to enslave the Israelites. This is an extra-biblical narrative. The biblical text simply introduces him as the priest of Midian. Zipporah's ancestry. Zipporah was the daughter of Jethro the Midianite, not the Edomite. Therefore, she was Midianite and not from Canaanite mixed lineage you propose. Levite ancestry. Moses and all Levites were descendants of Levi, son of Jacob, through Jacob's legitimate wife Leah, who was Armenian from Laban's family, not a Canaanite. Their lineage is traced strictly through the Israelite lines in Exodus 6. Well, Judah's ancestry. The claim that all of Israel's sons were half Canaanite before Judah married Tamar rests on the unproven, extra-biblical assertion that Laban's wife was a Canaanite named Adinah. Judah's mother was Leah, an Aramean. The text does not support the Canaanite bloodline through the matriarchs. Really? In summary, your theory weaves together complex ideas that form various sources, canonical, extra-biblical. The core assertion that Esau's Canaanite connections intertwined with Jethro's line and subsequently into the Levitical and Judean lines is not supported by the scriptural genealogies. The biblical narrative maintains a clear distinction between the Israelites, descendants of Jacob, and the Israelites and the Canaanite people, with marriages to the Canaanites generally being viewed as contrary to deity's covenant with Abraham. Okay. My point with Reuel Jethro is that since he was priest of Midian, and the Midianites were confederate with marriage and beliefs with Egypt and Edom and Ishmael, worshiping at Mount Seir, the same high priesthood would be for all involved, all intermingled as one nation at Seir. Obviously, why Esau married a Canaanite and named his son Abimelech, father Pope Molech, king. As David received the Molech Melchizedek priesthood of high king Ahimelech, also through Levi, and Jacob through Adinah and Job, but since Esau had dukes called Reuel, the Reuel son of Edom must be either Reuel that had a daughter named Zipporah or another duke of Reuel. Ra-el, high priest, as Reuel is a title. And their answer is crickets. Apple. They got no answer for that. Here are the top web results for exploring this topic. Whenever they get to that point, it's their way of saying apple. In fact, they know that we have this unspoken thing because I have said it on my videos and they're monitoring my videos. And they know that it's just this thing. It's not really even unspoken. It's kind of spoken now that whenever they don't know or can't give me the answer and they know that I'm right, they got to say either apple or just nothing. And they prefer on this AI mode to just say nothing because that way they save face and they don't have to admit that they can't tell me. So, what do you think about that? Now, let me show you another thing here. So, Numbers 13, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, send thou men that they may search the land of Canaan. So, we're going to find out where Canaan was. So, down here in 17, and Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, get you up this way southward. So, wherever Moses was standing with the children of Israel, he tells them to go southward and go up into the mountain and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwell therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be ye of good courage, and bring the fruit of the land now. The time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and searched the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob, as the men come to Hamath, and they ascended by the south, came unto Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. So they were in a place where there was the children of Anak by Hebron, and wherever Moses was, where they were just up Mount Horeb, they were going looking south. So go back to verse 3. It says, Moses, by the commandment of the Lord, sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All those men were heads of the children of Israel, and these were their names, Reuben, Shaman, and all these 12 tribes of Israel, and their chiefs and so forth. It goes through the list. And they're at the wilderness of Paran. They had just come away from Mount Horeb. And they were standing in the wilderness of Paran. Where is this Paran? Because from there, they're going south into Canaan. Notice that Moses just came from Mount Horeb, and they're going in now to spy out the land. We can show and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mount Horeb is in the, sometimes they call it Mount Sinai, but I believe it's actually Mount Horeb, and the mountain to the other side, or in the west, with the Nile in between, would be the mountain called Mani. But the Egyptians called this mountain that we call Mount Horeb the Mount of Olives, and it was called Baku. And it's also called by the Arabs today the Mountain of Moses. So we could just about prove that Mount Horeb was across the Red Sea in the Sinai Peninsula. All right? That's where Moses and all of the children of Israel camped. And it says they camped at Paran. So Paran is a desert region mentioned in the Bible, located in the northeastern part of the Sinai Peninsula and extending into the northwestern Arabian Peninsula. It is identified as the wilderness where the Israelites camped after leaving Mount Sinai, from which Moses sent the spies into Canaan. It's also depicted as the place where Ishmael lived with his mother Hagar. Okay, where is it? Well, here is a picture. Now, there's the Sinai Peninsula, and there's Egypt on the left. You see, Paran is just down at the bottom, and it's basically over in Saudi Arabia. Okay? So, starting off with where we left off, we saw where they were in Paran, and they went south from there. That's Saudi Arabia. And it says they came unto the brook of Eshcol and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they bare it between two upon a staff. And they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. The place was called the brook of Eshcol, because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence. So where is Eshcol? Well, AI says Eshcol refers to a historical biblical location near modern-day Hebron and a modern-day region in northern Israel. Now think about it, guys. They were down there in Saudi Arabia, and he says, I want you to go south. And they go south, and they find these bunches of grapes. And yet, today, they say that Eshcol is way up north beyond, up in Palestine, by Jerusalem and Hebron, where they call it Hebron today. I'll show you where real Hebron is. I'll show you where the real Eshcol was. It's south of Paran, on the east side of the River Nile and along the Red Sea, down by Medina and all of Saudi Arabia, and the area on the east side of the River Nile, which is where the Canaanites were. And we're going to show you that. So they're standing in Paran. We showed you that. I'll get a map here in a second. And they went from there south on a mountain and looked down into Eshcol, which is now supposed to be way up in northern, by Assyria, by Jerusalem. And north in Palestine? No, they're south of Paran. So here's where we saw that the wilderness of Paran is, right? Right here. Right? Right here. And this is Mount Horeb right here. And this is the Karnak temple. East of the temple of Karnak, which is the temple of Solomon or Amun Ra, you go directly east and you come over here to Mount Horeb, or otherwise known to the ancient Egyptians, the Mount of Olives. So Moses goes to this mountain right here, and he gets the revelation. They camp in the wilderness here, cross over into here. This is Paran. And then Moses says, I want you to go southward, go down southward to a place called Eshcol, southward. And this puts us around Mecca. But they want you to believe that they're standing there in this wilderness of Paran right here, right here. And they went southward, but it actually was up here, northward, that they went. Up by northern Palestine. Well, look, this is the river Egypt right here. This is the land of Canaan. This is the land of Ishmael and Esau. Not up here. And so the way they want you to believe is that it's the Jordan River, and then Israelites were over here and the Canaanites were over here. Actually, the Israelites were over here and the Canaanites were over here. And Moses went over here and up and around and conquered Ishmael and Canaan and all this area. And I'll show you that here. So they can't be right that the biblical valley of Eshcol is the fertile valley near Hebron, known for its large grape clusters, where Hebrew spies were sent to scout out the land. So where really is Eshcol? Well, get a load of this. Islamic identification of Paran with Hijaz. Yes, in traditional Islamic sources, the wilderness of Paran, Arabic Faran, is often identified with Hijaz region of modern-day Saudi Arabia, especially the area around Mecca. Well, that's exactly where it would be, wouldn't it? Where we just showed. It'd have to be there, not up in northern Palestine. See, the wilderness of Paran is identified in the region of modern-day Saudi Arabia, specifically the area around Mecca. The location of Ishmael, Islamic tradition holds that Ishmael and the mother Hagar settled in the wilderness of Paran, near the site where Mecca was later established. Friends, this is almost certain. I mean, I think it's certain. This is linked to the biblical account in Genesis 21:21, which says Ishmael lived in the wilderness of Paran. Tel Faran, a specific site known as Tel Faran, Mount Paran, is mentioned in some Islamic texts as being on the outskirts of Mecca. All scriptures inspired of deity, beneficial for teaching, reproving, and for setting matters straight. Linguistic link. 12th century geographer Yaqut al-Hamwa wrote that Faran is an Arabized Hebrew word, one of the names of Mecca mentioned in the Torah, prophecy interpretation. This association is significant in Islamic tradition because it is used to interpret the biblical passage in Deuteronomy 33:2. The Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. Now, hold on. If the Lord came from Sinai, would he be coming as a light? And so the dawn was from Seir. And he shines forth from Mount Paran. So if the area in the southern Sinai Peninsula, where Mount Horeb is also Paran and Mount Seir, then Mecca was where they went when they went to spy out the land. But this Mount Seir, that was where Esau ruled, and all the dukes of Edom, and Ishmael, they're in Mecca, and the Canaanites, they're on the east side of the Nile. That's where they all worshiped. With Egypt, because they were all connected with the Egyptians, the Ishmaelites, the Edomites, the Midianites, and the Canaanites. And they were all there in one nation. They all worshiped at Mount Seir, which is Mount Paran, which is Mount Sinai. Obviously, we know that Horeb is the mountain that Moses went up. And therefore, we're being lied to big time. Now, let's determine who this Anak was and his, because remember, there's a place called Kiriath Arba where Abraham went and bought a grave, and he was buried there, Isaac and Jacob. And, well, it says right down here, Hebron's location across Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. Hebron is known as Al-Khalil in Arabic. It is revealed as the burial place of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah, at the cave of the patriarchs, Ibrahimi Mosque. Well, those are the four, because the word Arba, the Kiriath Arba, where Abraham bought the grave, was the place where the sons of Anak were, and the word Kiriath Arba means the place of the four. The four would then be Anak and his three sons. Well, his three sons have tombs, and that's the three great pyramids. And Anak is the exact same word as Enoch. And that great pyramid is the temple of Enoch. And if Abraham bought that, then it's pretty obvious why he was buried there, because this area was called the tomb of Adam, or it's also where John the Baptist's head was cut off. So it's called Golgotha, or the skull. And where John the Baptist's head was cut off, which means the great priesthood of Heliopolis, and it was the capital or the decapitation of that great priesthood. Jesus also went to Golgotha. And if you notice, in that great pyramid of Giza, there's an empty tomb, the empty tomb of Osiris, who was raised from the dead by Horus. And this is the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead from Bethany, or the house of Ani, or An, or Heliopolis. And the tomb, and everybody knows there's a tomb not only in the top of the Great Pyramid, which is empty, Osiris's tomb, where Set tried to put him in there or whatever, and he rose, right? Because his wife Isis, who met him at dawn, just like Mary Magdalene met Jesus at dawn, and Jesus rose from the dead, right? Well, also Jacob met Rachel at dawn, and the whole night he was wrestling with Yahweh and the law and this evil deity of the lower ego. And then at dawn, he sees Ra'el, or the ray of El, coming over the horizon. And he was delivered. So, where is this tomb? Well, it's Golgotha. It's where John the Baptist was beheaded. And it's also the place of the skull. And not only is it John's skull, but others believe that it's where Adam and Eve was buried. Now, let me show you that. Down here it says, the suggestion that the four sons of Anak refers to the four pyramids, or is linked to Enoch, Cain, or the Anunnaki, is based on speculative, non-traditional interpretations and not found in the mainstream Islamic, Jewish, or Christian sources. The sons of Anak, or the Anakim, or how about the Anunnaki? In the Bible, the Anakim were a group of formidable, tall people, often translated as giants, living in the hill country of Canaan. Well, wouldn't that be on the eastern side of the Nile, as we've said, particularly around Hebron? Well, where's Hebron? Because they're claiming Hebron's in North Palestine. But as we have shown, where Moses was, Mount Paran is Mount Sinai, and it's down just near Mecca. Now, these four, the the four sons of Anak, which was the Kiriath Arba, or the four, their names were Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, along with their father Anak. That's four. So there were three known descendants, not necessarily four sons in the accounts, though the number of the Philistine giants faced by David was four. So maybe where's the Philistines located? I don't know. Well, symbolic, not literal pyramids. The four sons idea does not correlate with the pyramids. The spies feared the Anakim due to their strength and size, not because they were built massive structures. Anunnaki, Enoch, Cain. There is no credible link in religious texts or historical accounts connecting the Anakim to the Sumerian deity figures Anunnaki. Enoch, Idris in Islam, is a biblical prophetic figure distant from the Anakim. Cain is the son of Adam and Eve and the first murderer, and the lineage is separate from the Anakim in all traditional narratives. And there you go. There's how we know who Yahweh is. Jesus is one of the Yahwehs, right? The I am, the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection. And then Yahweh is I am vengeance. I am jealous. So we have Abel and Cain. Cain was the first murderer. And who did Jesus say that the Jews were? The offspring of vipers, a serpent. And it says that your father is the devil, a murderer and a liar when he began, and he stood not in the truth. So he was a murderer from when he began. Well, there were no murderers before Cain. Cain's the murderer. Everybody knows that. Cain is Yahweh, their father, and they are the offspring of vipers, or the lower cursed nature of the flesh. Not necessarily even a bad thing. Just they're the descendants of the flesh of Cain. Now, down here, it says Kiriath Arba, which is the city, Kiriath, of Arba, or the four, meaning this name translates to city of the four, city of Arba. Traditional interpretations, it might refer to the four prominent giants, the Anakim, Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, and their father leader Arba, who lived there. A Midrashic tradition says it is named for the four revered couples buried in the cave of Machpelah: Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. Those are the four, friends. Those are the four. And friends, if you think that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Adam and Eve, all these people were buried somewhere up in Palestine, we cannot find the Temple of Solomon. We cannot find their tombs, right? We can't find their gravestones. Nothing. But yet these evil, wicked people that people think Egypt is pagan and this Arba and all these pagan giants, and they're wicked and they're devils. But they got tombs. Osiris has got a tomb, the biggest building in all the world for thousands of years, until recently they built, Empire State Building or whatever, or the Sears Tower or something. But up until recent times, the Great Pyramid's always been the greatest, biggest, most spectacular building in all the world. Isaiah 19:19 says there will be a temple built unto the Lord in the midst of Egypt and at the border thereof, which is where the Great Pyramid of Giza is. That is the temple of the Lord. That's called the Pillar of Enoch. And the Pillar of Enoch is where the four were buried. And that's the Arba, the sons of Anak. The sons of Anak, the Anu Ki, is Anu and Ki, mommy and daddy, Adam and Eve. I guarantee it. But guys, I'm going to go ahead and end her there, and I went way over. I'm sorry about that. I had so much information that I wanted to get into this, and everything is just going so fast today. It was just all I could do just even get this out the way I did today. But I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I'm going to go ahead and load this now and bid you adieu. Lord loves you all. His grace and his peace will be with you guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.